This week on The Watchman, as terrorism strikes America and Europe, the Israel Defense Forces are on the front lines of the fight, standing in the gap for the West. An Israeli sergeant joins us to share his story.
The soldiers of the IDF are willing to walk through those risks and those challenges for one reason only, which is that at the end of those campaigns, despite all of those difficulties, they can return to their lives as civilians with a clear conscience.
If Israel goes down, we all go down. It's The Watchman. It's Christians united for Israel, only on TBN. And welcome to The Watchman. Well, it has been a long, hot summer in Europe and the United States. ISIS and its sympathizers have struck right here in the West, repeatedly in recent months. From Orlando, Florida, to France, to Brussels, to multiple attacks in Germany, Islamic terrorists are now striking inside Western countries on a regular basis. Folks, what we are seeing now in the West, this new reality, is what Israel has experienced for decades. While we here in America are located thousands of miles away from the madness of the Middle East, Israel lies in the very midst of Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, and many other vicious terror groups. Sadly, that close proximity has made Israel a virtual training ground for new terror tactics. Before an ISIS sympathizer in Nice, France, slaughtered 85 people by mowing them down in a truck, Palestinian terrorists were using similar car rammings to murder Israelis. Before ISIS sympathizers in Germany attacked civilians with an axe and a machete recently, Israelis were being knifed in the streets for months in what became known as a stabbing intifada. Before two ISIS supporters stormed a church in Normandy, France, and beheaded a Catholic priest, terrorists had stormed a synagogue in Jerusalem in 2014, butchering 4 rabbis. And long before, an ISIS follower blew himself up near a German wine bar in July 2016, Hamas suicide bombers had murdered hundreds of Israelis. The same goes for plane hijackings, which were all the rage among Israel-hating terrorists during the 1970s, long before 9/11. Lastly, years before ISIS and its legion of child soldiers even existed, Hamas was indoctrinating young children that Jews are subhumans who should be killed. Do you see the pattern here, folks? Israel is the first line of defense for Western civilization, fighting the good fight every day against the same radical Islamic enemies that wish to wipe America from the map as well. We here at Christians United for Israel know that Israelis have valiantly borne the brunt of the terror war for years. Now, they may not be appreciated by the world, but the 3.1 million Christians who have made CUFI the largest pro-Israel organization in America know the debt that we owe to the brave men and women of the Israel Defense Forces. Here's a closer look at what they are facing on a daily basis. The nation of Israel is roughly the size of the state of New Jersey, yet on every side it finds enemies that want to erase it from the map.
They are under siege by radical Islam and have been, have fought off multiple wars, but the radicalism of Hamas and Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations is rising exponentially against the state of Israel.
To the north, there is Hezbollah, boasting an arsenal of tens of thousands of rockets aimed at every inch of the Jewish state. To the east, there is Syria, where a hellish civil war finds ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and various terror groups battling Iran, Hezbollah, and the regime of Bashar al-Assad. All of these warring factions can agree on one thing:
Israel must be destroyed. It's a similar story to Israel's south in Gaza, where Hamas rules with an iron fist, stockpiling rockets and digging terror tunnels. A bit further south in Sinai, ISIS has a growing presence, and all the while Iran and its nuclear program loom.
Now, despite being surrounded by murderous enemies on all sides that have zero rules of engagement, Israel's military shows extraordinary restraint in dealing with the likes of Hamas and Hezbollah. The Israel Defense Forces go to unprecedented lengths to avoid civilian casualties, even as the terrorists they are battling use civilians as human shields. Nevertheless, some in the international community call Israeli soldiers war criminals and killers. It's a false narrative, and it's an evil narrative. That's why I'm so glad that we're joined today by Sergeant Benjamin Anthony. He's the founder and director of a great organization called Our Soldiers Speak that advocates for Israeli soldiers on college campuses and in other public forums throughout the United States. Sergeant Anthony is also a good friend of Christians United for Israel, and he joins us this week to bring the truth about the Israel Defense Forces in which he has bravely served. Sergeant Anthony, so great to have you here with us on The Watchman. Finally.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you know, we've been sharing stages together for years now at Kufi events,
Right.
and it's great to have you on camera now. Talk a bit about the rules of engagement of the IDF, and in particular, how the IDF goes to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties.
Well, if you want to begin with the rules of engagement, that's actually a very important point, because I was a soldier who was stationed in Hebron for several months. Now, Hebron is a very complicated area to be a soldier in the Israel Defense Forces, because unlike other areas where one might be stationed, it's Palestinian Arab house next to Jewish house, next to Palestinian Arab house, and so on and so forth. So the proximity of the challenges is very, very close indeed. And therefore there are very, very careful rules of engagement that every combat soldier of the Israel Defense Forces knows and adheres to. And so I'll give you an example of that. Supposing there is an attempted assault against a soldier of the IDF by way of somebody throwing a Molotov cocktail toward him. The soldier of the IDF has to say in Arabic, Waqif. Waqif means stop. If the assailant continues, they then have to say, Waqif wala ana batuqa, stop or I'll shoot. If they then continue to move towards the soldier has to cock his gun in the air, signifying the fact that there is a bullet in the chamber and that he or she means business. If that continues, they're allowed to fire a bullet at 60 degrees, hitting no property or person. And if the assault continues, they are entitled to then open fire for the knee down. And if they then continue, and believe it or not, people do continue even after being hit in the leg, they are then and only then entitled to open fire aiming for the center of the chest with the intent to kill. Now, those are the rules of engagement for any soldier of the Israel Defense Forces, and everyone knows them. And I would challenge anybody listening to this show to bring me the rules of engagement of either Hamas or Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And of course there'd be a stony silence because there are no such rules.
Yeah. Describe some more, a bit more, so the audience really understands those complexities, the decisions that have to be made in a split second by Israeli soldiers when Hamas is using human shields, and just insane situations that the IDF has to deal with and still deals with it admirably.
So the Israel Defense Forces, as I try to explain to people, deploys ground forces into the battlefield not to occupy an area militarily, but in order to make the differential between an innocent party and a guilty party. And incidentally, the complex situations are not only or exclusively over there in Gaza or in Lebanon or anywhere else, but they're actually happening within the state of Israel. So that can be that, for example, one might encounter a house where there are rockets that are held within the homes of a civilian family home. It could be, for example, that there are booby traps if one tries to remove a television or get dug in and fortify a place where they're wishing to be stationed for the evening. One can pull a television set away from the wall and one can find that those are actually booby traps to set off explosive and detonations. Yeah. There are myriad numbers of problems, not just in Gaza, but in Lebanon, in Hebron, anywhere that one looks to. And the soldiers of the IDF are willing to walk through those risks and those challenges for one reason only, which is that at the end of those campaigns, despite all of those difficulties, they can return to their lives as civilians with a clear conscience. But I do want to emphasize something very, very important here, which is that all of these traps, booby traps, pitfalls that are laid for the killing of IDF soldiers are laid with the certain knowledge by those who lay those traps that they may yet kill innocent civilians in the course of targeting soldiers of the Israel Defense Force. And that's absolutely perverse, because at the point of launch, they do not know whether those rockets are coming to a military base, they do not know whether they're going to hit a hospital, they don't know whether they're going to hit a home, and they could not care less. The goal is to kill innocent Israelis.
Up next, more truth-telling from Sergeant Benjamin Anthony. Folks, you see the information there on your screen. Join us here at Kufi as we stand with Israel against the forces of darkness and terror. It's the Watchman. It's Christians united for Israel, only right here on TBN. Stick around.
On nearly every border, Israel is surrounded by enemies that seek its destruction. Vicious terror groups like ISIS, Hezbollah, and Hamas are acquiring deadlier and more advanced weapons as Iran moves ever closer to a nuclear bomb. At the UN, the international community shuns Israel. On college campuses, Jewish students are harassed and intimidated. God's chosen people are facing an all-out assault. As a Christian, how will you answer God if you choose to do nothing? It's time for Christians to take a stand. Join Kufi, America's largest pro-Israel organization, where 3 million Christians across the United States are working together to defend Israel in our classrooms, churches, and communities. From college campuses to Capitol Hill, Kufi is making a difference and fighting for Israel. Visit our website, cufi.org, and join the movement for such a time as this.
We want to talk more about our Soldiers Speak, your great organization. First, I want to give the audience about an idea about you as a person a little bit, and your heart, which I've gotten to know over the years. Talk about your journey to becoming a sergeant in the IDF. You were raised in the UK, obviously. You experienced anti-Semitism as a young man, your family. Talk about that a bit, how you came to Israel, and how being in the IDF has changed your life.
Well, I was born and raised in the United Kingdom. Upon graduating university, I moved to the States of Israel, but I moved there with high urgency, and that was a consequence of two specific events. The first event was that at the age of 14, I bore witness to my older brother being beaten almost to death on his way to the Jewish high school that we attended. 8:30 in the morning, a balmy day in the United Kingdom. My brother was set upon by about 7 men who beat him, as I said, with the intention of killing him. That made me realize that anti-Semitism existed. It wasn't just an idea or a concept, but it existed.
They beat him because he was a Jew,
Simply because he was Jewish, simply because he was identifiable as a Jew by way of his school uniform. In the United Kingdom, school boys, school girls wear a school uniform. My brother wore a uniform that had emblazoned with on the breast pocket a Jewish sign, a Jewish symbol. And so having that in front of them, they knew that we were Jewish kids on our way to a Jewish school, and therefore in their eyes were worthy of being beaten. So that was one event. The second event was when I attended the University of Manchester, because I was there during the events of the Second Intifada, which is a wave of Palestinian homicide bombings, not exclusively but generally, against innocent civilians of the States of Israel, Jewish and non-Jewish incidentally. And no matter the number of buses that were turned into killing fields or restaurants that were detonated, there was near total unanimity within the United Kingdom behind the idea that the State of Israel had no right to defend herself. And that led me to the conclusion that there wasn't a bright future for the Jewish communities of Europe. And frankly, I think we're seeing that borne out today. So I moved to Israel, had the privilege of serving, and that service transformed my life because it gave me a sense of deep, deep pride in being a Jew, rather than perhaps having to hide my Judaism in England. It gave me a sense of clear purpose, legitimacy, and an understanding that if we are to defend the State of Israel, it's actually upon us to do so. Nobody's going to do it for us. It's upon us to do so, and it's a great privilege to be able to undertake our duties.
Yeah. Our Soldiers Speak, your main focus right now, is a great organization, and I love working with you and the people you're bringing to the States to get the message out. Talk a bit more about your organization and what you do.
So our organization is the only organization in the history of the existence of the modern state of Israel, through which the Israel Defense Forces and now the Israeli National Police, I'm very proud to say, dispatch uniformed active officers to speak on overseas campuses about what transpires in real time over there in the States of Israel. Now, a couple of aspects of that render as unique. Number one, as I said, the officers are uniformed. That means that the conversation can't descend, and I use that word deliberately, descend into politics. Uniformed officers can't speak on politics.
Right, you are nonpartisan when you're
Absolutely.
in uniform. Yeah.
We cannot go into those issues as would be the case in the United States. So that's one aspect that's unique. Beyond that, we don't go to a Jewish venue on campus such as a Hillel or a Chabad house, but rather we take up neutral ground and we speak to the pro, the anti, and the undecided elements of the student and the faculty communities alike. And the third aspect that's very unique is that we speak to the students in the language in which they wish to discuss the issue. So that means that if somebody wants to approach Israel through the legal lens, we bring an officer from the IDF Military Advocate General's Corps. If they want to speak about Israel through the medical lens, we bring an officer from the IDF Medical Corps. And if they wish to speak about Israel through the high-tech lens, well, we bring the officer in charge of cyber defense for the Israel Defense Forces. That's where you get a non-political discussion about Israel's view on matters that not only affect the state of Israel, but actually democracies writ large.
Talk about, for you, experiencing CUFI, Christians United for Israel, and what that has meant, just your impressions of CUFI, working with the team at CUFI.
Listen, it's a very, very rare feeling for a member of the Israel Defense Forces or for a member of the people of Israel to go to a place overseas where they sense that they're being hugged and held close and drawn close in a positive sense, rather than being pushed away, delegitimized, argued against, shouted down. I've never experienced anything such as this that I'm privileged enough to witness here year on year with the Christians United for Israel. And not only have I not experienced anything thus far, but I'm convinced actually the best is yet to come. I think that it's an organization that, frankly, as much as it's achieved tremendous things thus far, is just getting started. And I very much hope that they go from strength to strength.
Well, Sergeant Anthony, thank you so much. We're proud to stand with you. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah, God bless you. Coming up, a young Israeli sets the record straight and shows American college students why Israel is such a special place. It's The Watchman, only right here on TBN. Don't move.
Centuries-old churches and monasteries burnt to the ground, Christian villages ransacked, women and children enslaved, and believers in Jesus led to their deaths. ISIS has declared an all-out war on Christians. Believers in the Middle East outside of Israel are suffering horrible persecution. Christians United for Israel will not remain silent as Islamic extremists carry out a genocide against our brothers and sisters in Christ. On Capitol Hill, CUFI is working hard to ensure America's allies receive the aid they need to defeat ISIS. CUFI is leading a Raise Your Voice campaign to bring the issue front and center for Christians across America. Visit our website, cufi.org, to find out how you can stand with CUFI as we stand up for the persecuted church. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
And welcome back to The Watchman. Well, polls have shown that the millennial generation, those born roughly between the early 80s and the early 2000s, are not as pro-Israel as previous generations. In fact, American college campuses today are often hotbeds of anti-Israel activity, with so much disinformation being put out there about Israel for these impressionable young minds. We need voices for truth on campus. Thankfully, our friends from the Jewish Agency for Israel have provided fellowships for young Israelis to study at American universities. We caught up with one of the Jewish Agency fellows from the George Washington University Hillel recently to hear how he is touching the lives of his fellow students and making a difference for Israel right here in Washington, D.C. Take a look.
I always knew that I wanted to be that guy with the hat of the fellow. I was on campus in Queens College. I was always that guy who people came to ask questions about Israel. If it was Palestinians, Christians, Jews, Hindus, everyone. I was the Israeli on campus. We can ask you everything because you have no shame. In a good way, not like. And I found myself having so many conversations about my country, about the conflict, about Israel, Palestinians, about culture in Israel, about the food, about the people. Do you think I'm gonna get accepted if I'm Hindu? They're not gonna check me everywhere. No one's gonna run at me with bombs. No. And I came back to Israel. I said, I want to do that. I want to do that. I think I can do that. I think I have the capability to do that. After 3 years in Israel, I had the privilege of going through the process of the Jewish Agency, and I found myself, from all places, in Washington, D.C., in the George Washington University campus at the Hillel. Birthright is a trip that started 17 years ago. That was established by 4 very wealthy Jewish families who said that they want to make sure that their kids are connected to Israel and their Jewish roots, and they came to the conclusion that it might be the best way to send them people to Israel for free and get to know this country. 17 years later, there's over 500,000 students or people who graduated anywhere between the ages of 18 to 26 who went on this trip. Today, after leading 5 trips, about to lead my 6th one, I can fully say from the bottom of my heart, it's the most unique opportunity that I was able to have. I'm seeing my country again, falling in love with it again, because you take people for the first time, you have to notice all the little details. And that's including the tree that was always there, but you never noticed it. And like the people who live in DC, you walk next to the White House, it's like, okay, it's a house. And then people who come to visit DC, is this the White House? This is amazing. Oh, it is the White House. Oh, it is Metzada. Oh, it is the Western Wall. Oh, it is the Old City. Something magical is taking place. And to work with the students, engage in conversations about everything that has to do with Israel. If it's, guys, try this food. Guys, let's go to the Kotel. What does it mean for you to be Jewish in a certain place? Why is it that way? What do we see here? What is this wall over there? Is a big wall, small wall? How long is it? To know the facts. Some of these students walk around campus and people tell them, yeah, Israel built this big wall that separates between them and the Palestinians. Did it? Or it's only 95% fence, 5% wall because there were snipers shooting on Israeli neighborhoods. This is where I come in. Let me be the one who will ask you questions. Let me be the one who's gonna try to expose you and be the educator that will expose you to the Jewish world, Christian world, Muslim world. What is Israel? There's a lot of sides to it. Suddenly you see people who've never been to Israel being exposed to some things that are being told about Israel, such as Israel is an apartheid state. Israel doesn't treat its people right. Israel has separation between Israeli and Arab Israelis. And they look at the people who say these things. I've been there. Apartheid is the most remote thing you can say about Israel. To see people, Jews, Christians, standing for Israel, it's inspiring.
Coming up, my final thoughts on Israel's crucial role in the battle for the free world and how you can help. It's The Watchman. It's Christians United for Israel, only on TBN. Don't move.
On nearly every border, Israel is surrounded by enemies that seek its destruction. Vicious terror groups like ISIS, Hezbollah, and Hamas are acquiring deadlier and more advanced weapons as Iran moves ever closer to a nuclear bomb. At the UN, the international community shuns Israel. On college campuses, Jewish students are harassed and intimidated. God's chosen people are facing an all-out assault. As a Christian, how will you answer God if you choose to do nothing? It's time for Christians to take a stand. Join CUFI, America's largest pro-Israel organization, where 3 million Christians across the United States are working together to defend Israel in our classrooms, churches, and communities. From college campuses to Capitol Hill, CUFI is making a difference and fighting for Israel. Visit our website, cufi.org, and join the movement for such a time as this.
And welcome back to The Watchman, only right here on TBN. Folks, these days what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. And if terrorists have tried something in Israel, it's a good bet they'll eventually try it here. We're now seeing the kind of suicide bombings, car rammings, stabbings, and shootings that Israel has dealt with for years. Now, you'd think that Western leaders would stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel to face down our shared radical Islamic enemy. Instead, Israel has received more criticism than it has thanks. And Western leaders are tripping over themselves to embrace an Iranian regime that remains the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 5, verse 20, God Almighty says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Folks, those days are here. Thankfully, our team at Christians United for Israel realizes that we are facing a relentless enemy that is driven by a radical Islamic ideology. We realize that Israel stands on the front lines of this battle, and we realize that if Israel goes down, we all go down. We also realize that Israel is the apple of God's eye, His chosen land and people, His inheritance. Folks, you need to be a part of this great move of God, this movement for such a time as this. Now, you see the information on your screen. Call us or go to cufi.org to join 3.1 million Christians across the United States as we stand for Israel, for America, and for all that is good and true. Thanks for joining us here this week on The Watchman. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.